Joe, I wanted to say first, thank you for having me. And so I certainly want to bring a perspective here to the table, but I'm also just excited to learn from you all as well as we go through this. And to your point, being vulnerable. So I agree. And something to build on, we do have a diversity in workplace issue. And we've got to acknowledge that, because we've got to acknowledge it first. We've got to address that we have a problem so that we can take action to address the problem. Diversity is just step one, by the way. Diversity to me it's about representation. Of course. And yeah, we can visually see when we're making difference in sort of our representation, at least across some views of diversification, right? In terms of female or African American or Latino. But it is building beyond that, because diversity is just step one. It is then about creating a sense of belonging, and to your point, a sense of inclusion. And we've got work to do in corporate America for sure.
So, and I agree with everything you guys said. Look, we've made progress, but I don't think by any stretch of the imagination we've arrived, I don't think we're at a space where we should be beating our chest yet. Like, we got it. I think and help me understand, and look, Dave, we're in technology and financial services. When I think of the amount of innovation, like, we went to the moon, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like you think about it, like the technology and the pace we grow. Why is it so hard that we can't fix or deal? Like, why is it so difficult to deal with this diversity issue?
Yeah, I'll take a crack at it to start, and I'm sure I'm excited for what you two will build on it. To me, one of the things, and I saw a illustration just earlier today, wasn't looking for it, just popped up on one of my social media feeds, that tackles equity versus equality. And to me, the understanding, I feel that's such a core misunderstanding, or again, as we try to drive greater focus on diversity, have some misunderstandings of inclusion, it's based on today where, for me, in corporate America, depending on some leaders, they feel equity and equality are similar. So, so the illustration simply had short race start to have, so let's call it a 200-meter run. Gentleman had a very clear path on that 200 meters, and there was a female on the other race, and it had like bricks, an alligator, barbed wire. And so at the end of the day, you can look and say that there's equality in what the race or what the distance is, but the equity that's put into it, that's where there's the gap. So I think, again, where today's society, we may look and say, but it's the same race, but everything that led up to it doesn't make it so equal, And I think as you build on why it's so hard, again, that's one of the multiple reasons I think it's hard, but I think there's a lot of the understanding between, again, equity and equality that we have to get around first.
For sure, and those alligators and barbed wire that you talk about, right? Those are the institutional and structural barriers that have been in place for generations.
Sure, correct.
Like that's why it is, it is more difficult than it feels like it should be. And this whole equality thing is, it's not going to be easily solved, but it is really thinking about almost how do we really evaluate and redistribute how we think about being able to provide opportunity. Because just because, this whole model of, work hard and you can accomplish anything, to your point around this race, it sounds like, that sounds right? But then the reality is that not everyone has been given the same opportunity for generations past, right? So it's not an easy thing to solve, Joe. We've got a lot of work to do, and it's not necessarily in our hands, but there are things that I think we can do as leaders in corporate America that can make a difference.
Yeah. Good point. I mean, Kiesha, I don't know if you have a thought. As I'm listening, and I agree, and I appreciate the context. I think, in addition to that, right? At the end of the day, we're still people, right? So even there's institutions, but the institutions is upheld by people, and if we don't figure out how to make sure we're keeping people accountable, right? That they're living to the principles that companies. By the way, this is like. Companies are providing these expectations that we are thriving for diversity. We want to make these investments. If employees aren't kind of holding people accountable, then it'll be tougher to kind of get there, right? So there was a quote, and I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it verbatim, but the CEO of Wells at the time, Charles, he had said, when kind of probed about diversity issue, his comment was, look, it's unfortunate, but there's just not enough talented Black people. And this is someone who we revere. I mean, again, if you follow the financial service market or whatever market, you know, Charles is someone who's very intelligent, who's I'm sure he's very calculated. They don't just say things. I'm curious to know from your point of view, is that the case? Like, do we just not have enough talented minorities to employ? Like, is that why in IT, you know, people of color represent just a single-digit percentage? Like, I would love to hear from your point of view if that's the reality.
Well, just reading that quote, right, kind of made my blood boil a little bit.
Sure.
First of all, it really says something about his leadership, right? And I think the intent with a lot of these organizations to diversify and include, you know, and have, you know, all walks of life be represented within the organization. There's really no plan, right? And you had mentioned numbers and metrics. You have to have a plan and constantly evaluate that plan, right? What do you want it to look like when it comes to recruitment? And sort of and we can delve in a little bit deeper, because I think recruitment is a huge component, and partnering with lots of organizations, right, that'll help with that, right, and partner and attract that talent. But if you really look at a lot of the leadership in these organizations, what do they look like, right? And I'm not saying that there aren't people of color in leadership positions, but, you know, going to his statement, I mean, that's what he knows, right? Yeah. And so that's why the importance of attracting and retaining diverse leadership and management is key. And to sort of, you know, to kind of go to the statement where it doesn't exist, I mean, we all know they're not actively, like I said, partnering with organizations, diverse organizations, to attract that talent, going into the community to do mentoring, and you know, a lot of the times, like I'll just notice with a lot of organizations, they're partnering with, you know, Harvard or Yale or Villanova, where, you know, you can't say in these areas, like here in Jersey City, that there's a lack of, you know, of intelligence or a lack of, no, it is here. It's just, there's not an active plan to go into these communities to start mentoring, right? And that's why it's so important to me to represent, right? To have people like myself, you and you, to show, hey, this is something you can do, right? And this is how we can make it happen. And partnering with organizations, or the organization that we work for, and creating those communities and creating those partnerships to attract it, right? And show, hey, look, you know, in these communities, sometimes all they see is kind of in this bubble, right? Showing there's people that look like us, that are in corporate America, that are in financial, and all these different walks, but companies have to make an active plan to do that, and constantly evaluate and make sure that they're adhering to that plan. I don't know if you guys want to.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that is not reality, but it's his perception. And for that organization at that time that statement was spoken into life, it became a reality for Charlie Scharf. I'd say, in thinking, like, to me, it sounded defeatist, because even if, let's just say he was open, or as a leader, using that as an example, if a leader that has that same perception was looking to be the spark of change, I would have rephrased it to a way that says, I am not happy with the way our minority, colored, or female leadership shows up today, and this is what I'm going to do about it. Versus stating something that in his world seemed factual, which actually was not factual. That's how you get this defeatist mentality. It is not easy for me to promote Black people, and thus there may not be enough. And so one of the things that I've kind of held on to early on, again, back to the start, step one in diversity, is you can't be what you can't see. And so, like, I remember for me, and some of the things that I've done non-for-profit wise, there was a organization, all female, unfortunately, you know, victims of human trafficking, out in Cambodia. And so as we started getting into a dialogue, I asked all the girls, they were all between ages of 5 to 16, and asked, what do you want to be when you grow up? All of the girls said, I want to be a police officer. And I said, okay, that's interesting. And so one of the aides pulled me and said, well, considering their situation and what they've been around, that's where they all want to be, obviously, because they want to see that difference. So I took a second, I talked to them about my 2 leaders at the time, who were both female, and said, well, my boss, so I work at a bank, I work at a financial institution, and here's my job, and my boss is a female, so her job is bigger, and her boss is a female, and her job is even bigger. You just saw the mouths drop, and so you ask the question again, what do you want to be when you grow up? And like half of them switched to being in banking. And what taught me was there in their mind, like that was a cue into what this I can't be what I can't see. They didn't see that as an opportunity until I said, my boss is a female, her boss is a female. And they said, well, now I want to be that because someone told me, someone like me sits in that seat. And so I think it has to work in both ways. One, and it starts at the top to cause that change, but be able to be visible enough and for the audience to be open enough to say like, okay, I see there's that path, because if not, you're never going to get more minorities in tech, more females as engineers, everything, more males as whatever it is that the change can be, unless, again, it kind of starts both ways.
I'm going to be a little vulnerable here because I feel like, again, coming back to our conversation, there's alligators and barbed wire out there from an equality standpoint. We've disenfranchised communities from being able to get access to proper education.
Sure.
We've got, the institutional and structural barriers I just referenced before. And I think we need to take a step back as society. And I know, we've been at this for a while. I thought we had made tremendous progress when I saw an African-American president sit in the U.S., but realize now, like, we still have so much more work to do.
Sure.
So I do think that, systemically, we've got to address how do we provide opportunity in communities that historically they have not been given a chance. Yeah. That is not an excuse, though.
Sure.
I think maybe to the comment and the reason why you raised Charlie's comment, and that is this, which is as leaders, right? There are tons of things that I see that it's such a positive trend. You just talked some of the work that you just talked about. I think about programs like Black Girls Who Code, Nyamwange Foundation, Joseph, the work that you're involved in with giving scholarships to individuals that wouldn't otherwise have an opportunity to proceed with their education. So we've got to take these things at a micro level, things that we can make an impact around to drive change, to give, whether it's African American blacks or females, the opportunity to get jobs in corporate America. So we need to be extra deliberate about it, because I do actually think there is an equality issue that we need to address, that if we wait for that to happen, though, it potentially could be generations from now.
Correct. So let me ask you this question in the spirit of vulnerability. And Dave, I appreciate you because obviously I know you personally, but I know you're an ally specifically for the African American community in general. The perception that Charlie has, do we think that's more common in corporate than we think, or is that a one-off, right? So like when I think of ally, I think of someone who defends, not just publicly when people are looking, but even privately when no one's looking. Do we think is that a perception issue that needs to be kind of called out, or was Charlie really just a one-off when we think of within the corporate?
Yeah. By the way, I don't mean to defend Charlie, but first of all, I think the fact that he made that comment is the exact type of conversations that we need to be having in this world and society today. So
Agreed.
I like the fact that he was vulnerable and just said it, maybe even unintentionally, or without maybe thinking it through. I think that's that's a really positive step to being able to us talk about it here in this forum today. Correct. So that's one. Two is, I bet if you ask Charlie today, similar to our own CEO, maybe has made a mistake or two in public before in the past. He maybe rephrase that, right?
Of course.
And so, but your question, it still holds true, which is, I think people can sometimes, just as myself as a hiring manager, my team, where I've got a team of hiring managers in my organization, it's sometimes convenient and lazy to make that statement or to think that, whether they say it explicitly or implicitly.
Yeah.
And if we're going to make change here, it actually is going to take a bit of effort.
Yeah.
And so people who think that or say it, I need to make sure that we realize like that's the lazy way out.
Correct. So shifting gears in terms of like practical things that corporations can do to ensure, and I want to unpack this a little bit because I do want to also spend a little bit of time talking about retention because that's its own kind of its own beast. But what could if I'm company X, I mean, we hear a lot of like, look, we're going to pour money into making sure we're going to try to increase the diversity. These are all good things. I would love to kind of hear from you guys your perspective on what can companies do specifically to help improve the diversity and the inclusion portion.
I mean, I'll tee off because it goes to your last point around Charlie. I think that's step one. If the seat at the top can't find themselves being vulnerable or find themselves in a position to want to learn or be better, everything else is just checking the box. Where I think when you put yourself and you have a CEO, as you know, again, for Charlie had to kind of take a quick step back, probably was a big learning moment for him.
Of course.
I can guarantee you that learning moment did more for Wells Fargo, his organization, and his way of thinking than if he would have remained quiet. And I think today we find too many of those in power that find silence as a form of peace. And I love that connection because Amanda Gordon, in her address at President Joe Biden's inauguration, the opening line, no longer will we connect silence to peace. And I love that phrase because I think the first things have to be spoken.
Yeah.
Because once they're spoken publicly, privately, you begin to be in action. And so again, I think, spending some time on the whole Charlie piece, but I know that now that's the spark for action. Vulnerability, which I know we can use often, but it's then how does that connect into action? So then how do those things, once you're in a place where you fully understand, again, every business, even Fortune 500, there's a finite number of resources, people, hours, dollars, and there's no good cause that isn't worth someone's money or time. But we know that things like that run out. So I think understanding what's a priority, what can they do with the resources, with the seat that they have on the table. Yeah. And then again, as a hiring manager, it's how do you see that then represented within your group? And then finance probably closer to some of the metrics, but how do you move those metrics in a place where it's responsible in your investing, that you can put on, I think about as a kid, we all had report cards. Like there needs to be a report card that's out there that says, here's where my board is today. So there's also so many times where the words are right, but then you reflect. I'm always one let me see who's on your board of directors. Let me see who's on your operating or executive committee.
Yeah.
And then so sometimes then those words fall true. So words need to be said for accountability. And as consumers, as employees, as a nation, that accountability has to come in multiple areas, because if nothing is then done, it's again goes back to silence, which again, that's what I would say historically we've kind of geared towards.
So to answer the question in terms of how, I guess you had asked how to retain it. So I know I mentioned having a plan. Without a plan, right, you plan to fail. And measuring those metrics, right? So whether it's quarterly, and also I think recruitment, right? So working with diverse recruitment firms, right? And having a plan and targeting, right, diverse candidates. Also leveraging our network, right? I know we've done several diversity and inclusion events together, and we have a huge network of leaders of color or, of all walks, arrays of life, and leveraging that, right? Encouraging the employees to leverage that and continuing to grow a diverse network. One of the things I remember when I was interviewing, the hiring manager actually posted a picture of his team, right? Because if you see yourself, right, in the team, you're like, oh wow, look, I'm represented here.
Yeah.
Regardless of what the team, and allowing them to be, each one of your employees to be who they are, to come to work and be that individual and embracing that. And so when you're attracting talent and they see themselves in that team, they'll more likely want to go work for an organization. Oh, I want to be a part of that. I also think, and this is a conversation that we could go on for years about, but in terms of retaining it, right? Because there are a lot of organizations that talk the talk but don't actually walk the walk, is tackling that unconscious, bias and some of the microaggressions. I know as a woman of color have had it and continue, unfortunately, even as I move up in my career, have to deal with, right? And again, as you were saying with the CEO of Wells Fargo, I think, I wasn't attacking, and I think like being vulnerable and, like you said, he may not have just had exposure. A lot of these leaders are kind of in their sort of microcosm and are not exposed to it. And the fact that he recognizes that there's a lot of leaders, like you said, may not even want to say anything, right? So having those uncomfortable conversations, setting metrics, constantly evaluating them. It goes on and on. The recruitment, the partnering with diverse organizations that could help with that. And I think, this may not be, but I think it's also up to us, right? When I get into a position where I am now, I feel like it is my duty. I came from a very poverty-stricken neighborhood, without parents. It was probably stacked against me that I would not be in this position. I feel like it is my obligation to put my hand back, right? And that's why these type of conversations are super important for me to show other girls. And I've had the last Women Breaking Glass Ceilings event that we had, young girls on social media reaching out like, I can't believe, look at all these women that are in these positions. And you know how excited and how promising? That's why representation is huge. So it is part of as employees, right?
Correct.
As individuals, as leaders, as managers, to represent and to reach back. And that's why mentoring, that's why partnering is super huge and important, I think.
Yeah, so even I'm glad you brought up specifically when we think of just recruiting or bringing people in. You can't negate the natural biases and tendencies when you're hiring, right? You want to hire someone that kind of reminds you of yourself to some degree, and it's not necessarily racial. It could be character-based, passion and these kind of things. And to be vulnerable, I remember when I was a manager at another company, I remember having that natural bias that if I saw a person of African American, I was gonna try to give him the nod. Like he would have to talk his way out of a job. Was that right? That's not the point for me, but it's more of me having to check myself and think of what are we trying to kind of fit and what type of space we're trying to create. So I love the idea of being able to recruit effectively, right? And having more of an open mind. That's gonna come from training. That's why I'm for making sure we're continuously training hiring managers, but also going to recruit from historically Black colleges or going to recruit from where there's a bigger pool, right, of folks who might fit the mold. And this is not just on corporations, right? I think communities also have to play a role. I'll give you an example. I went to talk at where I graduated grammar school from, and I was telling them my career. And I was telling them about Microsoft, and their exposure to Microsoft only is Xbox games. You know what I mean? Like they didn't know that you could actually.
Is there anything else?
No.
And all the Q&As. When's the next Xbox coming out? The new game. What's better, Xbox or PlayStation, right? But even in talking to them, I don't think even they're exposed of what's out there, right? So I don't know. This is just me kind of thinking through it. I didn't know, Dave, you had a specific point on what can we do, and I know you've done a lot specifically within your organization to try to bring. So I would love if maybe you could share some best practices you think are helping move the needle towards in a more inclusive environment.
By the way, on the range of if this was karate, I'd be like a white belt, maybe a yellow tip, the yellow tip. I'm on this journey, right? And I make mistakes along the way, so I'll first do that. You reminded me of a great tactic though, which is we've got people in our organization of female and diverse backgrounds and of color and Latino race, and they've got networks.
Sure.
And so just asking the simple question, do you have anyone in your network that might be a fit for this role that I have open?
Yeah.
It's like, that's the most simple thing.
Yeah.
We just started something in my, with my leadership team, actually, coincidentally, last Monday. We went into Sales Navigator and we created a lead list. My diversity and inclusion lead, Deanna Miller, I might be who you know, set it up, and we spent 45 minutes of my leadership team meeting going through our network. We had the roles that we've got open in the org posted, and we're moving over people that we think would be potentially good candidates with the primary focus of looking at women, African American, Black, and Latinos as a pool, because again, if we just left it to recruiting, we might not have full representation of candidates that are the best people to fill that role. The second thing that I've had to go through this journey myself, and I keep encouraging my managers to think this way, which is our criteria for who the best candidate is. So often it's like someone who knows how to do this role, someone who understands Microsoft, someone who understands how to navigate a complex organization like Microsoft. Well, guess who comes up on the top every time? It's an internal candidate from the same pool that we're trying to change the makeup of, right?
Correct.
And so I'm like, think about who's the best candidate a year from now. 18 months from now. If we're going to transform this organization and transform the financial services industry, we need to be looking to the future around the potential. And that changes hopefully the profile of the candidate pool that allows us to pick great candidates of diversity and just diverse backgrounds.
Yeah. Part that I'd add, and I've always challenged, so at PNC Bank, being a destination. And so that's easier said than done. Like, again, the reputation Microsoft has for a plethora of reasons has made it a destination. And granted, I'm not in the in-works, and we all have things to improve on. But for me, I always hold that, like, if you stopped recruiting today, who is trying to be part of your organization?
That's a good
A lot of times that's a story within itself.
Yeah.
Because you can tell your brand, who it resonates with, what communities are impacted, and that tells the long work. And so for me, that's the starting part of the conversation, because if you're not striving to be a destination, you get them in the door, and you've been heavy around that retention, that recruiting and retention, they're going to leave on the back end. And so all you were a stop in their final, approach to their destination. So what are you doing internally? So as you beef up your recruitment on historically Black colleges, impacted communities, again, people of different backgrounds, they come in and say, oh my God, I'm here to stay.
Yeah.
And so, it has to happen in tandem, because again, as we get that priority, because to your point, like I know for one of the things we do at PNC is ensuring a diverse slate of candidates for every interview. Internal, external, doesn't matter how, it has to, before you move on to offer, there needs to be that stop the BS. Don't tell me you can't find someone that is different than the majority. And again, whether it's hey, here's a top performer. I love the recommendation, because that top performer, you go to your top performing, female person of color and say, hey, who do you know? You're not only going to get someone most likely diverse, but also a top performer.
Yeah.
So it's such a win-win, right? As again, circles. But so I think that challenge to say, like, hey, before an offer is made, I had to have been able to interview enough people to say, regardless of what the choice was, I can go to anyone and say, hey, I met females, males, person of color, different backgrounds, and this white male was the best choice. Like, I know, knowing that background, then that's the best, because at the end of the day, every company needs to always focus on their best. I think today, what we define to be the best is where the work needs to be done. But again, that's where hopefully that diverse slate of candidate, that commitment to a diverse slate of candidate makes a difference.
I just wanted to add a little bit on that. I think also, like, part of the interview process, it's important to have a panel that's diverse, that's interviewing.
Correct.
I know we talk a lot about culture fit. Like, are you a culture fit? To me, is going to be how I identify. Are you like me? Do we have? So there's that. There's also removing some of the biased questions, like interview questions, right? I know working in financial services, I deal with the old boys club all the time, right? So kind of removing some of that. And I also think to sort of drive in the retainment, and some companies do a great job, I know Microsoft, is communities within right, within the organization, right, that they can lean on, they can leverage, they can grow, they have their voices and their network that you can leverage. So just to add on to that.
Such great reminders, by the way. Like, it's a simple thing. Like,
I used to be a recruiter. That's
well,
why.
and again, we know this, right? Like, make sure that the interview panel is diverse, right?
Yeah.
But it's something that I bet if I went back and checked the last set of hires that were done in my org, I don't know that happened all the time, right? So like, there's just some great, just simple reminders.
Yeah,
Correct. You brought this one thing about culture, right? Where, and I think you posted on LinkedIn a while ago, of when we think culture, we look at ourselves as opposed to what could Kiesha bring to Microsoft in her story, right? So just kind of changing that mindset. But I do want to shift real quick before we wrap this thing up. I want to talk about retention. I just want to lean in that a little bit more. We know the numbers are low in terms of, and I'm calling specifically minorities, whether it be both in tech and financial services, right? Could be higher. But for the folks that are there, speaking my truth, it's not always easy. Everywhere I've gone. Matter of fact, if I see another African American, there's this automatic nod, like, I know what it took for you to get here. You know what I'm saying? Without a word, if you need anything, I got your back. Like that's the automatic feeling. And I just want to, and if you did a poll, I haven't talked to every single African American in tech, but if you did a poll, I do think, especially in the climate that we're in now, it's hard being an African American in general, let alone being an African American in corporate. So I would love to kind of get some perspective and thoughts from everybody on, from a retention standpoint, knowing all these data points, how do we create a space where Black people, women, Latinos want to stay? Because we could do all this work, Dave, on the front end, but if there's a hole and they're leaving, it's almost for naught, right? How do we deal with that?
Yeah, listen, and it's a real issue for me specifically because I'm looking at my new hire slides. We just did an all hands, and I was just took a step back and just sort of smiled because it's representing the exact type of diversity, at least visually, that we want to bring into the organization. But I've got holes in my tub, right? So we're filling up this tub, and I think we're making great strides. And some of those holes, by the way, are people not leaving Microsoft, but are leaving the organization to take their next role at Microsoft. Some of the attrition is, quite frankly, it's good attrition. It's attrition that they're probably better served at another company because they weren't the right fit in the role. But there's certainly a portion of that that's bad attrition, like great talent that is going to a competitor, and I gotta imagine it's just because they didn't get a sense of belonging or think that there was a future for him or her as a next step in their career here at the company. And so it's an area where I'm really focused on trying to figure out how do we create a better sense of belonging and making sure people feel they're welcome and they belong here, and trying to take quite frankly, some steps to ensure that if we see potential in an individual, in particular a minority, that we're putting them in a position of power and demonstrating that there is progress here at the company. Yeah. So it's I don't know that I certainly haven't cracked the code, and I look for others' ideas here.
We wouldn't be having this conversation.
But listen, it's a real thing, and it got exposed to me because again, I kind of see the hires come in, I see the announcements come out, I'm like, I feel like we're onto something here. And then I look at HR sits down with me every month and shows me my stats, and I'm like, man, I got to do better. Yeah.
I mean, again, on this journey, I'd probably relate back to retention. That vulnerability, like it does take both sides. I put the responsibility on the organization. Like ultimately, that's where who's in control, but you have to be vulnerable enough as an organization to call out your own opportunities in order to kind of drive that belonging for people that are there to help. I know for me, I'm part of PNC's solution to get better. And why? Because they've deployed me in such a way that as a senior leader, I also feel responsible for what's happening. But that's cascaded down because it's going to take more than just me.
Correct.
But so as you become vulnerable and say, hey, years ago, we're not as diverse of an organization as we want to be. There it is, it's out, it's public. Here's the steps that we're doing, and be able to enroll, right? Because there's, I used the word cascade before. A leader that I know used the word, always compares the difference between cascading and enrolling. As you enroll your people to be part of that same mission, they become stakeholders. They don't become employees. And I think today, but an organization has to earn the right to evolve their employees to stakeholders. Correct. But so as we saw and say, hey, all right, so we have mountains to move to get to there. But at PNC, we started seeing our board of directors evolve and change as those retired. Yeah. And again, it wasn't any knock on those that sat on the board prior. They did a great job. They got our company to where it was. But when those opportunities happen, some through retirement and some in creation of roles, right? Because it stops, if you're in a position of power, a hiring manager, you manage a P&L, you can also create opportunities. Correct. And so we saw our board now today sits at a female or POC majority. It's one of the very few in a Fortune 200 company that is a majority female person of color. So now you started putting the tenants back and saying, all right, hey, well, now you have a board of directors that holds leadership, the CEO accountable. As you started seeing that moving, the executive committee starts changing. Yep. So, but in that meantime, in order, you also have, because that didn't happen overnight, nor can it happen in any company overnight. But if you drive, again, that enrollment of your team, they're willing to say, okay, today, do I work for the perfect company? No. But is it a company that's striving to be better day in, day out? Yes. I can tell you that's where probably more people stay, not because they found their spot, but because they believe they're part of a journey to get. And again, that's easier said than done. And it takes a lot of people. Like I think of my org, I manage 8,000 people. Like that is not happening tomorrow because just Jeff got it right. My 8-9 directs have to do it. They're following 100, and then it keeps on flowing and flowing. But I think if you get that and get that mission that starts from the top, you'll see the retention shift. And you can't be short-sighted. It can't be like, hey, I've said it.
It's a journey.
And so let HR give me my retention reports 2 months ago. They're still leaving. Sure, yeah, they don't believe you yet. Yeah. I don't believe you yet. And you have to call that out to say like, all right, 1 year from now we're going to check. And let that be a reflection of the work that you've done as a leader, as an organization, versus those that decided to opt out and go somewhere else.
Correct.
I just want to give you kudos for all the work that you've done. This is not an overnight. There is no code to crack, right? Because we wouldn't be having this conversation, obviously, if we've got this figured out. But just the work that you've done, I think feeling empowered. I know, no organization is perfect, but I do feel empowered. I feel like I have the platform to not just represent, but that our organization is, we have conversations. Joe's on our all hands. This is something that he's very passionate about, and he empowers us and encourages us. So yeah, nothing is perfect, but that's why I want to stay, because I'm like, I want to be a part of this. I am a part of this, and I'm helping change the narrative, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think the little communities within, right, our organization are important. I think level setting, just having frank conversations with your employees, like how are you feeling? And I know there's HR stipulations that go with that, but level setting, how are you feeling? What, there's a polls that you can take. What do you ask your employees? What do you think we can improve on? I know they're not to keep on, plugging in Microsoft, but they do a great job with that, with the polls. So, it's not an overnight thing, but I think as long as you have a plan and you continue to work on it, I think that it's promising and hopeful for me, at least.
Yeah, so here's my thought. Like, some companies are doing it better than others, obviously. And I think we all have work to do. I think at the macro, it's important that companies and leadership set a vision, right, in terms of where we're going, and make sure they're holding people accountable. And apply the same rigor that they do in R&D, that they do with, when they're preparing for, what they're reporting to the street. That same energy has to be applied to D&I. And it's actually better for business if you look at the stats. Here's what I would say that I would add to what you guys all said. It also goes down to that mid-level management. And here's why. Most people who leave a company, it's not because what the CEO said, what Satya said, whomever. It's that direct person that they talk to. And if they're not equipped to lead people of diversity, people of color would leave. Because my experience as an African American, it's different than a Caucasian experience and an Asian experience, right? And it's not just a blanket slate. And on top of that, it can't just be operational. So I'm in sales. It can't just be all about forecasts. And just in the spirit of vulnerable and kind of transparent, the George Floyd situation last year left me in shambles. I was broken, right? Dave was one of the people I called. Like, look, man, I'm struggling with this because I can't separate work from what's happening in my everyday life anymore, like I've done throughout my career. I did a good job, like saying, all right, I can be a community guy here. And when someone asks me, what do you want to be remembered for? I want to be remembered for someone who fought for something that was much bigger than just a quota or this. It was about creating a space where someone like me could be comfortable, right? And so I think one of the things, and I say this all to say, like, look, we're going to have to lean in on also ensuring that we're empowering mid-level managers to lead with empathy, to spend time understanding, right? And so a good leader, right? Not a manager, but a good leader would spend, if I have a team of African Americans, I'm going to ask questions with a growth mindset to learn, like, what is really the struggle? What is this thing called black tax? Like, what is the burden you come into work with and leave with, right? And how do I use that to say, okay, look, I know this is real. I want to be here to support you. And the reason why this came, previous company, and I'll leave the company name nameless for now, but it was a time where it was, I think, either Philando Castile or what happened in Baton Rouge, and it was really, really tense in America. We used to talk about everything at work. We would talk about sports. We would talk about things that had nothing to do with work. There was this, when that happened, dead silence. No one said a word. Maybe a couple days, like, damn, this is after there was like that riot in Dallas. Damn, it's messed up. That was it. Broke me because no one acknowledged, even just pulled me aside and said, Joe, like, how you feeling? But it was expected. You got to come and show up. And so look, not to get long-winded, but I do think as we continue in this journey and we're thinking retention, we're all in this together. And that's not just on the onus of my people who are Caucasian or Latino, it's also on people like myself to realize that in this space, there has to be a level of grace. Like, someone's gonna make a mistake. Charlie's gonna say a comment, and I keep picking on him. But whomever is gonna say something, that's fine, right? It's the intent, because I know if Dave slipped and said something, I know Dave's body of work, and I know where he is. But that comes in me getting to know him. And I think we're gonna have to create a space where we get to know each other, right? So to kind of put a button on it, look, this is something that is gonna take time. I think as a people though, I feel like we've talked for a while. And I think now the onus is on action. Like, what are we gonna do? We shouldn't be struggling with diversity in New York City. If you can't find a talent pool of diversity in New York, we're not in Montana or somewhere. Like, we gotta look ourselves in the mirror and kind of ask ourselves a tough question. So, I think I'll have one last question that will just kind of, if you guys give me a sentence or two that we could share. What would you say to the folks who are watching this who aren't in the corporate infrastructure, but they want to get in, right? They're nervous, they're scared, or they maybe just got in and they feel alone, right? Does any support? What word of encouragement, or what would you tell them in a line or two? And we're going to go this time, Dave.
Are you going to start with me?
We're going to start with you this time.
Listen, and I don't know that I'm well prepared to address those that are coming from that position, but I think about an organization like Microsoft, and I just, again, it's a gift to be at this company. I've been there, I just passed my 15th year anniversary. So I think about, for example, our Blacks at Microsoft organization, which has been around, I think it just celebrated its 30th year anniversary with over 3,000 members. There are communities and connections that, regardless of your background, there's a connection there. We've got all these small micro communities across the company. To reach out and find those folks and understand what they're going through and how they got to where they are in the company at that time. There's a lot of support out there, and know that there's people rooting for you out there as well. Like, you've been brought into this you've been brought into the organization. If you just are new to the company, people want you there. They want you to succeed. And while we haven't got this all figured out yet in corporate America, there's certainly, I think, a direction where there is an intention to want to get it right. And we've got a long way to go to nail it perfectly, for sure. And for those that aren't in corporate America yet, but have the aspiration to get there, remain positive. I'm a big believer that you make your own luck, and you've got to certainly be prepared, making sure that you do the work to earn the right, but have the right positive outlook, and making sure that you find allies and sponsors that can put you in a position to get you that first job.
Awesome. Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah, with Dave, shout out some great nuggets there. Similar. So, I'd start, obviously for me, knowing that through my evolution, I've switched companies only once, and I think I've found the one that, we've said a lot about culture and belonging, that I truly belong at PNC Bank. Again, not because it's perfect, but because the openness to make an impact aligns with what I want. Your part around, like I think about how we have mobilized action. We started and broken it from listen, learn, and act. And today we sit and act as an organization, which again, hopefully is that visible part throughout the entire organization to say we are in action around the words after we've listened, after we've learned, and we've acted. For those that I've seen come up, again, that allyship, that mentorship, sponsorship, it's critical. I know one of the things that to me is surround yourself with positivity. So seek it out, whether in a peer, whether in your manager, whether in your family, or whether in some historic words that I know I have read that in times where maybe I don't find it in a person, I find it in history. And then I'd say that back to that history is, if you find, if your journey hasn't been the easiest, like, let that be your fire that moves you forward. I think a lot of times we look at that journey as a way to call out, you are already different. Yeah. You have already achieved so much. You have already crossed so many hurdles. Let that be your own inspiration. Because many times I sit down and I hear what some of our interns, newer, and especially those with, diverse backgrounds, and I'm like, you're 23. I'm inspired by what you've done before you've gotten to 23. What are you looking at me for inspiration? And sometimes it's calling that out. So seek out positivity and refer to your own path to be your own fire within. And again, just making sure that culture is absolutely important, but not only seek out the right culture, make sure that you are you're able to give yourself as a culture carrier.
Love it. Kiesha.
You guys have pretty much summed it all up. The advice that I would give for those that are in corporate America is just remember that all that you've done to be in the position that you're in, you belong, your contribution matters. In terms of from a standpoint of the board of directors, it statistically proven that you help with the bottom line of a company and making money. But more than that, trying to get into corporate America, the networking is huge, right? So even if you don't have it around you, we have great platforms like LinkedIn or different networking groups that you can seek out to be around that. And, one of the things that, maybe not at the time, I have two sort of mantras. At the time, I didn't really respect the struggle, but there is beauty in the struggle. And everything that's happening in your life is happening for you. And you may not be able to acknowledge it at the time. It's not happening to you, right? So, respect that struggle. I'll say I don't take anything for granted. I'm incredibly blessed and fortunate, and that's why the importance of me reaching back is super huge for me. But just remember you belong and your contribution matters, right? And you're important. You're just as smart as I didn't go to an Ivy League school, right? Yeah. I didn't come from a background like most others. And look, I'm alongside, right, with some of, folks that have, and my contribution is just as important as theirs. So don't minimize or think that you're not as smart or not as important or your contribution doesn't matter. That's my advice.
Awesome. Well, look, guys, I want to just, from the bottom of my heart, say thank you guys for getting on this panel. Look, this is not an easy conversation to have. And I think for a long time, we've kind of danced around it a little bit. We try to be politically correct. We kind of get nervous. But I think we're at a space where we have to be comfortable and courageous to call it, see it, and fix it. And the reason why I specifically had each of you guys, because you guys aren't just talkers, right? You believe in this stuff and you act on it. And I think it's encouraging, especially for those who are viewing, to see what courage looks like, right, when we can have the conversation. So I want to thank you guys so much from the bottom of my heart. And again, I appreciate the work we're doing. This is something that I'm going to keep pushing. And especially as now a father with 2 daughters, I want to create a space where my girls can do, whether it's corporate or not, that they could be whatever they want to be. And same thing our generation, previous generations did. So again, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it. It's a good time.
Thanks, Joe.
Awesome.